On January 3rd, 2004, 148 passengers and crew boarded Flash Airlines Flight 604 bound for Cairo. The aircraft takes off at exactly 4:44 a.m., and 2 minutes later, it disappears from the radar. The pilot in charge has a little over 7,000 flight hours under his belt, so he's no rookie. And according to his designated route, the aircraft should have ascended for a short while after takeoff and then banked left, heading towards Cairo. But instead, less than a minute into the flight, the plane banks right, flying completely on its side, and begins spiraling downwards towards the Red Sea. Just before impact, it appears that the pilot gained control over the now upside down aircraft, but it was too late. The aircraft barrels into the water only moments after takeoff, and there is not a sole survivor on board. Why am I telling you this story? Well, because upon investigation, there was no evidence of any aircraft related malfunction or failure. So, what led to this tragic incident? Well, after examining all of the possible scenarios thoroughly, the United States research team concluded that the only scenario identified by the investigative team that explains the accident and sequence of events and was supported by the available evidence was a scenario indicating that the captain experienced type 1 spatial disorientation. What does that mean? Well, they define type 1 spatial disorientation as when a disoriented aviator does not perceive any indication of spatial disorientation. In other words, the pilot doesn't think there's anything wrong. What he sees, or at least what he thinks he sees, is corroborated by his other senses. And type 1 disorientation is the most dangerous type of disorientation. The pilot is unaware of any problem and fails to recognize or correct the disorientation, usually resulting in a fatal outcome, like in this case. So during spatial orientation, the pilot is unable to detect the position of the aircraft relative to the ground below, and it usually occurs when there are no visual cues available, like when you're flying through a dense cloud or surrounded by pitch darkness over the ocean at night in this case. In these types of situations, the pilot may be convinced that he's flying straight when in fact the aircraft is in a banked turn, or when coming out of a level turn, he may feel like he's diving. Now try to ponder on why this may be problematic. If the pilot now goes to try and correct their perceived position, which is not the aircraft's actual position, things can take a turn for the worse really quickly. This is also what happened to JFK Jr. when he crashed his aircraft into the Atlantic Ocean on July 16, 1999. Now, how can a pilot be convinced that he's flying up when in fact he's flying down? Or that he's moving straight ahead when in fact he's in a banked turn? The human brain's navigational system calculates our position by comparing signals from a couple different areas, but one in particular being the inner ear, which is where you have these canals that have fluid within them, and that fluid moves when we move about. The only problem is that this fluid is kind of like honey. It's a real dense, like viscous type of fluid, meaning it doesn't quite catch up with the fast rate of the plane's directional change, causing the false signals to be transmitted to the brain, leading to a miscalculation of our position in relation to the earth or the ground below us. Well, if this is true, why don't we hear about plane crashes all the time? Because our brain has other systems that it also utilizes to orientate us in space, creating this redundancy. For example, our eyes or visual system. If all of our systems are saying the exact same thing about one's orientation, we can sit back and say with fairly good confidence that we know where we're located at in space. So in this instance, if the aircraft were to be flying in better conditions, where the pilot could see everything around him, he surely could have seen that he was in a banked turn to the right and heading towards the water. But it was 4:30 in the morning. It's pitch black out, and there's no lit up markers in the Red Sea. I had just read about this accident, and I wanted to share it with you because I thought it did a really good job at portraying the importance of our brain's navigational system and how when you become less reliant on one system, you need to increase reliance on another. This doesn't just apply to pilots and aircrafts either. It also applies to the ground as well as patients who are experiencing dizziness. Let's talk about visual motion sensitivity. Let's say that you get dizzy with things moving in your environment. In this case, they have become reliant on their visual system due to a fault in another system. Oftentimes it's the inner ear. Why? Because let's say that something moves to my left, my brain now needs to calculate, was it that object that moved to the left or did I move to the right? And if my inner ear system is working appropriately, I can now say to myself, I know I didn't move because I didn't get any input from my inner ear saying that I went that way, or vice versa. If I didn't get any input, or if I did get input from my inner ear, I can now make the assumption that the object in my environment probably didn't move. It's a process of elimination. Also, before we go, I wanted to leave you with a little reassurance that this doesn't happen on the next flight that you get on, because when training to become a pilot, the first thing a pilot must learn is that although he may feel 100% certain that his aircraft is going in a specific direction, this could be an illusion, which as you can imagine is probably pretty hard. They have to develop a willingness to believe that under certain conditions, their own senses about their orientation in space could be wrong. With that being said, aircrafts have built-in navigational systems so that the pilot can now rely on objective information about the aircraft's orientation, even if it contradicts the information that the pilot's brain is perceiving. It appears that this pilot did not detect these changes because his attention was not focused on monitoring the plane's navigational system. The pilot had only his own brain's navigational system to rely on, and that was receiving misinformation from his inner ear and no information from his eyes, resulting in this catastrophic outcome.